A billionaire visits his daughter's grave and finds a man, just a janitor, crying in front of her headstone with a small child beside him. But what happens when a wealthy father, on the anniversary of his daughter's death, realizes she had a secret child, and that child is standing right in front of him? The life of Richard Whitmore was like a fortress built of glass and steel, solid, luxurious, and cold. His penthouse sat on the 57th floor of the tower that bore his own name, overlooking the glowing lights of Manhattan. At 54, Richard was the embodiment of the American definition of success. His black hair had silvered at the temples, and his once razor-sharp blue eyes now carried heavy shadows, the weight of sleepless nights and regrets that could never be erased. His name was carved on skyscrapers, on Forbes covers. The press called him the real estate king of the Northeast. But in that lavish apartment, the only thing Richard's heart could hear was the echoing emptiness of his own life. Isabel Marie Whitmore. She died 10 years ago, on a rainy October night. The car lost control and plunged straight into the Hudson River. Isabel was only 24. Richard remembered every detail of that night. He had been in Tokyo, in a meeting for a $200 million acquisition. The phone rang at 2 in the morning. His assistant's trembling voice came through the line. The flight back took 14 hours. By the time he reached the hospital, it was already too late. A cold room, a white sheet covering a small body. Richard pulled the sheet back with trembling hands. Isabel's face looked peaceful, as if asleep, but her skin was frozen to the touch. "My daughter," his voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." But apologies made too late are just ghosts. When Isabel died, a part of Richard's soul went with her. For the entire 24 short years of her life, Richard had been the kind of father who was always absent. Not because he didn't love his daughter, he did, deeply, in his own way. But that love was always overshadowed by work, by meetings, by deals he kept convincing himself were impossible to skip. He still remembered Isabel's 6th birthday. She had begged him to stay home for her party with friends. But that day, a client flew in from Dubai. Richard chose the meeting. When he returned home at 11 p.m., Isabel had fallen asleep on the sofa, still wearing her pink princess dress. The birthday cake sat untouched on the table, its 6 candles long extinguished. His wife, Catherine, looked at him with cold eyes. "She waited for you until 9, then cried for 2 hours. Richard knelt beside his sleeping daughter, gently brushing her smooth hair. "I'll make it up to you, sweetheart. I promise." But he never fulfilled that promise. There was always another deal, another flight, another reason to be gone. By the time Isabel turned 12, Catherine filed for divorce. "I can't live with a man married to his work," she said. After that, Isabel saw her father less and less. By 18, she barely spoke to him. Richard had another child, Marcus, 6 years older than Isabel. If his relationship with Isabel had grown cold, then his relationship with Marcus was nearly shattered. Marcus once tried to follow in his father's footsteps, studied business, worked at Whitmore Enterprises for 3 years, but he couldn't take it anymore. "All you care about is profit," Marcus had shouted during their final argument 4 years ago. "You don't care about people? You don't care about me? You weren't even there when Isabel needed you the most." "You don't understand the pressure of running an empire," Richard fired back, his voice hoarse with anger and pain. "No, you don't understand," Marcus said, tears in his eyes. "You traded your family for skyscrapers, and what do you have now? 2 children who hate you." The words sliced straight into his heart. Marcus walked out that day. Since then, only a few short holiday emails. No calls, no family dinners. Just silence. Every year, on October 14th, the day Isabel died, Richard followed a private ritual. He canceled all meetings, turned off his phone, and drove 2 hours to Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. The cemetery, old, quiet, sprawling beneath oak trees, looked more like a park than a burial ground. Isabel's grave was on a small hill, under an ancient oak. Richard chose it because Isabel loved trees. As a child, she used to climb the tall tree in their yard and sit there reading for hours. Her headstone was simple, made of gray granite, engraved with Isabel Marie Whitmore, 1989, 2013, beloved daughter. She painted the world with her dreams. Richard refused any grand memorials. Isabel hated extravagance. She loved simplicity and sincerity, the very qualities Richard had forgotten while she was alive. This was the 10th year, a round milestone, heavier than all the others. That morning, Richard woke before dawn. From 3 a.m., he lay staring at the ceiling as memories of Isabel drifted through his mind like old film reels. Isabel at 3, laughing in his arms. Isabel at 10, proudly showing him her painting. And Isabel at 18, looking at him with sad eyes. At 6, Richard put on a simple black suit, the old one Isabel once said she liked because you look more like a normal dad when you wear it. He carried a single red rose, her favorite. Richard had no idea that today's visit would rewrite the rest of his life, because on the other side of the hill, beneath that ancient oak tree, stood a man, a janitor with calloused hands, silently visiting Isabel's grave. Beside him, a small child was carefully placing tiny stones on the headstone. Who were they, and why were they crying at his daughter's grave? If you're watching this story, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what comes next will keep you glued to the screen. Sometimes the biggest secrets aren't hidden in documents. They rest silently between two graves. That morning, Richard didn't let the driver take the wheel. He wanted to be alone. The black Mercedes S-Class quietly exited the underground garage of the Whitmore Tower, rolling along FDR Drive where the East River reflected the first light of dawn. The city was waking up. Joggers moved along the riverfront, small coffee shops lifted their shutters, and the smell of toasted bread drifted in the breeze. Life went on, even though inside Richard, time seemed to freeze whenever he thought of Isabel. As the car moved across the Brooklyn Bridge, the sun rose behind Manhattan's skyline, painting the sky in vibrant streaks of orange and pink. Isabel had loved mornings like this. She once said, "Every sunrise is a painting the universe makes by hand, Dad, and no two are ever the same." The memory tightened something in his chest. Richard drove slowly through the old streets of Brooklyn, rows of brownstones, artsy cafes, vintage shops emitting a nostalgic charm. 10 years had passed, and the neighborhood had changed in many ways. But Greenwood Cemetery remained the same, quiet, ancient, seemingly untouched by time. When he parked and stepped out of the car, Richard felt his heartbeat accelerate in an unfamiliar, uneasy rhythm. 10 years. Yet the pain remained as raw as it had been on that fateful morning. Some wounds, perhaps, never heal. Some losses time can only circle around, never truly cross. Holding the red rose, he walked up the stone path that led to the hill where Isabel rested. A gentle wind blew, trembling the leaves of the old oak tree. Then, in the stillness of the place, Richard heard a sound. At first, he thought he imagined it, a trick of memory. But no, it was unmistakably crying. Real, broken sobs, tearing through the quiet like a jagged rip. Richard quickened his steps, heart pounding, and when he rounded a cluster of red maples, the sight before him made him stop. In front of Isabel's grave, a man was kneeling, his shoulders shaking, his face buried in his hands as he cried. The kind of cry that sounded like it came from the deepest part of someone's soul. Next to him, a girl about 9 years old sat on the ground, carefully arranging small stones into a little pyramid. Her purple jacket was worn,